Okay, so this presentation is about the information that we need to get into the IPS, and the testing will be whether the information can be easily brought to that IPS. Next slide. World vaccinations are currently rolled out in an unprecedented way. In the beginning, it was more centralized cold chain distribution with mass vaccination centers and hospitals and only 3 brands. But now it's diversifying in a supply chain to community pharmacies, GP surgeries, companies, schools, and there are now multiple vaccines will come. Also international donation programs start up with international supply organizations, but also country-to-country donations. And vaccines are shifting from country to country. Yes, next slide. It becomes increasingly complex to document. The supply chain becomes complex. There are now multiple vaccines with different vaccination schemes. One single shot, multiple shots, maybe a booster, or even hybrid vaccination schemas, first AstraZeneca and then a Pfizer shot. So all this is increasingly complex to document. Who was vaccinated when, by whom, with what? And this information is needed for the national vaccination program, for the registry, for international statistics, for real world data, for green pass programs, which can be sectorial, national, or international, for the individual medical record, and finally, and that's the purpose of this Connectathon, the e-patient summary. Next. In this article published in Vaccine, we have already set out the prerequisites to be able to track and trace global use of COVID-11 vaccines, and it has been published in January of this year. Next slide. So the question is, who was vaccinated, his age, his gender, priority status, etc. So the identification of the vaccine person. Who did the vaccination, when was it done, the first shot, the second shot, the date of the booster, and where was it done? In a vaccination center, in which country, in which state, was it in a vaccination center, in a hospital, or in a GP surgery? And then, most importantly, of course, with what was the vaccination done? And that's the product name, and you will see that the same vaccination has a lot of names, and that can be confusing. Names are diverse, but also the codes are diverse, national identifiers and international identifiers. And we don't only have to know what product was given, but also, and that's really crucial for all kinds of things, especially for pharmacovigilance, we have to have the lot number. Next. This is a snapshot from the website of the Belgium Drug Information showing the 4 vaccines here, Comirnaty, COVID, Moderna, Janssen vaccine, and the AstraZeneca Vaxeviria, with the description of the dose form and some indication of the pack size and the dose. These are all Belgian identifiers and presentations of the products. Next slide. We have the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the dose, the AstraZeneca, with different descriptions of how big a dose is, whether it's a concentrate or whether it's a solution for injection. We have the different brand names here, Comirnaty, COVID vaccine, Moderna. From Johnson & Johnson is actually called here the vaccine Janssen, in honor of the researcher who started the vaccination program at Johnson & Johnson, a Belgian, by the way. And then AstraZeneca, who has now also a real brand name and is no longer called AstraZeneca vaccine.
What are CTI and CNK?
These are the national identifiers. One is for the pharmacy system and one is from the regulatory system. So we have, for each of these COVID vaccines, national identifiers in place. Okay? Next. But so the problem is that we don't only want national identifiers, we would also like to have a global identifier. And for that, we need to standardize the description of the COVID-19 vaccine, as we need to do that for any medicinal product. And we could do that standardization following the proposition of ISO-CEN, the IDMP standards, the identification of medicinal products, a whole suite of standards, which basically tries to impose a standardized description of the substance, a standardized description of the dose form, and a standardized description of the strength. That is then converted in substance code, in dose form codes, in a strength value and a unit code. And all these numbers then are fed into a number crushing hash function, and a global pharmaceutical product identifier is generated. Next slide. So that becomes then instruments to facilitate the scanning of the information during the documentation act of the vaccination. And therefore, we use barcodes on the records in the vaccination center, but also on the individual vials and the syringe for vaccinations, so that we can easily identify the product and the batch or lot number, which is should be conveyed by scanning and not by transcribing a string of figures in a manual way. And it's also important, if we use barcodes, behind the barcodes are the identifiers, and they should be commonly agreed. They should be either the national identifiers, but these are common to one country only and can become meaningless in another country when a vaccine lot is shipped to another country. The GTIN, which is common for the supply chain of the whole world. And then the PHPID, which is common for the world, the regulatory world. Yeah, next slide. So that brings, when we have a well-organized supply chain with 2D barcodes on the primary and secondary packages, and barcodes that capture global identifiers and lot numbers in any vaccination site, that will, of course, facilitate easy documentation of vaccination acts and ultimately make sure that the right information ends up in the statistics, in the registries, but also in the electronic records and the international patient summaries. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. That's great.
There is a question from Derek. Do you want to answer at the end, or?
I prefer that
okay.
Christian will
at the end.
Respond to that. Yeah, at the end.
Thank you.
Let's get the three presentations together. Yeah, Malin?
Yes. So, hi, I'm Malin Fladvad, and I'm working for the Uppsala Monitoring Center, which is a WHO collaborating center working with pharmacovigilance on a global scale. We are, on behalf of WHO, taking responsibility for creation and maintenance of some of the IDMP identifiers, such as the PHPID. I'll just stop my video to ensure that you hear me. To test the ISO framework for the global PHPID, UMC is now running a pilot for the PHPID within Unicom. And one of the focus areas is, of course, the COVID vaccines, due to the urgency to have unique identifiers to facilitate the vaccination process. So, as you know, the current COVID vaccines on the markets are diversified and they use different platforms. And here's an example of the vaccines used in Europe. And as you can see, there are two different platforms, the viral vectors and the mRNA vaccines. And UMC have now calculated the preliminary PHPIDs for these COVID vaccines. And I will tell you some about the challenges that we have faced so far and also how we are solving them. So if we go to the next slide. So as Robert previously described, the PHPID itself is calculated based on the identity of the pharmaceutical product, which is defined by the active substance, the strength of the vaccine, and the dose form that is administered to the patient. So here's an example of the PHPID for the Pfizer vaccine, with the substance having the INN name, tocinameron, and the strength of 100 microgram per milliliter, and a dose form of dispersion for injection. So at first glance of these parameters, this seems quite straightforward, but all of these require structured and standardized data, which is not always the case. You can see here, for example, for the Pfizer vaccine, you can see that just the names are different for different regions, for UK, for EU, and for US. And the dose form are also defined differently. UK defines the dose form as a concentrate for solution for injection. The EU defines it as a dispersion for injection, and the US as a suspension for injection. And there are also similar differences seen for the strength for the AstraZeneca and Janssen COVID vaccine in different regions. So if we would use these different strength and different dose forms for the PHPID calculation, we would not have identical PHPIDs for the same vaccine. So here, I think we have a real challenge. So if we go to the next slide, we also, of course, have the substance information, which have a great need for harmonization, especially for the vaccines. As you know, the vaccines are very complex compared to other medicinal products, and therefore we need to agree on a global level on this information. So we actually have a joint vaccine initiative ongoing, starting the beginning of this year, where the US FDA, EU, and UMC experts, they work together to agree on harmonized substance information with the end goal to publish non-confidential vaccine substance information in a UMC-hosted system as a foundation for a global substance ID. To the right of this slide, you can see an example of the information in the system and what it would look like for the Pfizer vaccines. There are, of course, many more details, except for this, that is needed for the vaccines to describe it as identical. So all of this information regarding the vaccine substances are now being compiled and will be used together with an algorithm to create a unique global substance identifier that follows the ISO standard for unique identification. So from all of this, I think you can clearly see the challenges regarding the substance strength and dose form to actually create the PHPID on a global level. And I think we have come quite a long way in the UNICOM project to ensure that UMC can produce these global PHPIDs that are consistent and useful. So I think one just needs to point out that it really needs to be a global harmonization effort and having one maintenance organization to ensure that we have these IDs. So that was all from me. So I will now like to hand over to Christian so that he can explain a bit more regarding the other identifiers that are really crucial for the vaccination process. Thank you.
Thank you, Malin. So my first slide is just to list the portfolio of identifiers. We already heard from Malin, the substance identifier, something is necessary here, that's on the way. The pharmaceutical product identifier, something is available, it's on the way. And by the way, the objective of IDMP is to serve primarily pharmacovigilance, and pharmacovigilance require the pharmaceutical product identifier to have the capacity to share information on medicinal product across jurisdictions. But in the portfolio, we have then the medicinal product identifier, MPID, that's the yellow box you have here on this graphic. And that's very important, that is country specific. If I skip the marketing authorization, which is obviously country specific as well, we can go to the medicinal product package identifier, so-called PCID, that's in the blue box in the middle. And you see it has a couple of relationships. One of these is the data carrier identifier. We name that usually global trade item number, GTIN, in my language, because that's possibly you all know I work with and for GS1. I put also in italic the SNOMED EMPP because this is not a silo. This has a link to the clinical space, and I will show you one information regarding that. I have a second slide to explain the relationship between these different identifier. I may be a bit quick on it because it's the same as the previous graphics, just you see the cascade, you know, of the relationships. PHPID, so the global identifier, the MPID, this is in a country. The packaged medicinal product has a relationship obviously with the medicinal product. And at the very end, you have the DCID, meaning data carrier identifier, which is in the supply chain. With this type of relationship, you can go from the top to the bottom. You can also go from the bottom to the top. So you scan the DCID and you must be able to come up to the PHPID. This is an example, and I just want to pay a tribute to my colleague Jean-Gonzague Fontaine from GSK Vaccine. He made these two slides, among others. It's really helpful to understand from also nearly the real life. This is nearly a real product. And you see it is a product which is registered in a market where all the packs are sharing the same authorization. So it is a special situation. Other countries may have another type of a rule. And you see again, we have one GTIN corresponding to that product, 500 milligram per 100 milligram for Great Britain and Ireland. And there is a second pack, a bit larger, just for Great Britain. And they both have their data carrier. From the real life also, I picked this, I suppose it was in Geneva. This is a good example of a label which you find on the secondary pack of a medicinal product, such as the Moderna vaccine. I say it is in Geneva because that product code, that GTIN, comes from the US. So it is still unique, it is perfectly unique and perfectly used also in Europe. And you see a couple of other attributes. SN stands for serial number. These products should be serialized. They are not. They had an exception for the first phase to the serialization. The serialization, you know that in the US with the DSDSA, we have the Falsified Medicine Directive in Europe. Has the purpose to fight against falsification in the legitimate supply chain. And you can imagine with the vaccine, there are temptations. The scanner reading this will provide you this yellow string. And honestly, a normal human cannot read that. If I pass this information, I will find a couple of information which are useful for you. This document, this slide is mostly for your documentation. But you have an ASCII character first saying, here comes a GS1 data matrix, a data matrix containing a GS1 formatted information. There are other data matrix on the market because it's an open data carrier, but they will not necessarily have a language like the GS1 language. The GS1 language has this characteristic. You have so-called application identifier, these yellow characters here, and they introduce the meaning of the following data fields. And I don't want to comment this in the detail, but you see for the expiry date, for instance, when it goes human readable, it's better to write 29th of May 21 rather than a sequence of 6 digits, which you may be hesitating to know if it is the year 21 or the year 29, 2029. There is another information which one can find or must find from a global trade item number. It is who is the licensee of that number plate, license plate. And here you see for this Moderna product, the licensee is Moderna, and the company prefix, so the number which is uniquely identifying the company in that space is 0380777. And it had been updated on the day of my birthday, not long ago. I promised you to say something about the linkage between the regulatory space and the supply chain space at the same time, and the clinical space. This is something which I found quite recently, because yeah, sometimes it's a race to find such information. You have here below the source in a hyperlink, and I just compressed a bit the results so that you can see the actual medicine product pack according to SNOWMED. This is the lowest information here below, and you have the GTIN corresponding to this, which is actually the one on this this box next to you. Voilà, let me summarize. We tried, Robert, with this perhaps high view of the problem, Malin to give you some insight in the solutions we are in the course of implementing, and my modesty to explain where we are playing down to the grounds, I mean the grounds on the supply chain, and then the link to the clinical space. We state that the full product information must be captured in the immunization process. And we urge you to test this in the Connectathon and in what other possibilities you may find to test it. You have, of course, when you scan a barcode, to parse information. That's clear. There are systems to do that. And I mean, GS1 is a very open source solution. Every scanner can do that. And then you can extract from this block of numbers and letters what is the product ID and what is the locked ID, and you put that in the right fields so that immunization card, electronic health record, or immunization record, as well as the IPS, can be documented. And with that, we increase patient safety, and we increase also pharmacovigilance. Robert has mentioned at the very beginning that we know today, I personally had a FHIR immunization first shot a few weeks ago. The next one will be next week. When I show my immunization cards on the screen to a colleague in the US, he doesn't know what my product is because we have not the same brand name. But when it will be for the booster, then it will be even more complicated, because if we don't capture really the product ID, we will be quickly lost. I hope I was not too long, and I give you the floor back. Oh, yes. I'm done.
All right. Thanks, Christian. I think we're going to have Dominique present now, I believe. So I think you should be able to share your screen, Dominique.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very glad to have the opportunity to present our project. Let's see where I can find all my windows that are open. Yes, here it comes. I will put it in presentation mode for you. Can you tell me, I want to manage my time carefully for you. How much time do I have for my presentation?
Well, I think we were probably thinking around 10 minutes or so, but if you need a little more, we're probably, I think we're doing pretty well, actually.
Okay, so. I'm a fast talker, so I think that will go. It also depends on the number of questions we have afterwards, if there is time for questions. So I'm the National Project Manager for the Vaccination Registry Program in Belgium. I'm the Director IT from the Flemish region in Belgium. So we have 3 regions, so the Dutch-speaking region. We had a project into place already already before the COVID-19 crisis, and the Flemish project is now rolled out for the whole of Belgium. So we already have since 2003 a good working system for the registration of the vaccinations and the ordering of all vaccinations for the young population between 0 and 18 years old. The use of the system by GPs, hospitals, specialists is obliged since 2015. So we have a very good coverage of all vaccinations that are registered to Vaxenet. That is the name of the project. So in Flanders, we have a population of 6.5 million citizens. And every year in Flanders, 360,000 people are vaccinated for about 2.2 million doses or different vaccinations. Mostly for young children, but we also accept registrations for travel medicine and vaccinations for people that are above 18 years old. Why did we do that program? Is because we want to manage the stock into the vaccination centers at the GP's office in the hospitals. We have a very efficient supply chain, so we monitor the stocks. They can order their vaccines immediately. 3 days afterwards, they have the new vaccines delivered. And this way, it's a very good incentive for the GPs to register the vaccinations. I'm talking about the non-COVID vaccinations here. So we were asked to roll out this program for the whole of Belgium because there was no other system into place that was able to react swiftly and become a COVID-19 vaccination registration system. We were asked to do this at November 20th last year, and we were able to roll out this project for the whole of Belgium within less than 5 weeks. So we had to onboard more than 5,000 vaccinators in the other regions, but I will go more into detail about the difficulties we had on the project and how we tackled them. So that's the positioning of Vaxenet. I think it's interesting to give an introduction on the e-health landscape in Belgium. As you can see on the left side, you have Vaxenet as a registration system. That's a standalone application, but we have a network of interconnected hospital hubs. So we have 2 hubs in Flanders region, Leuven and Gent. We have the Walloon hub in the French-speaking region, and we have the Brussels hub in our capital. So that's a hospital network. So all hospitals are connected to one of those hubs. There is also a meta hub that you can compare with the yellow pages. Via that system, you know where there is a record about a patient, and you can question that system directly and find information. If you're a GP, if you're a doctor in a hospital or whatever, if you're in the home care for nursing, for instance, you can access all that data. We have also, for the first line care, 3 health vaults where we store data from the GPs and share that with the hospitals and other GPs in all the regions. So we have 3 vaults: Vitalink in Flanders, Intermed in Walloon, and BrewSafe in the Brussels region. So via this network, everything is interconnected, and you will see that when we have registrations in Vaxenet, we share them via Vitalink in Flanders, and we share all the vaccinations of the whole population. And via all those hubs and interconnected electronic health records, everybody can consult the data and the vaccination status of our citizens. We also have patient viewers. So for instance, Vitalink, which is a vault, doesn't have its own front end. We allow integration with other third parties. For instance, the My Health viewer from the insurance agencies, a federal portal, mijngezondheid.be, and for instance, portals from the hospital networks. They all can deliver that information towards the patients. I think that's a very good evolution, that patients can access their data via different entry points. They can also consult their hospital information via the hospital networks, and they can see the information from the first line care that is stored in the vaults. Like we have in VitaLink, summarized electronic health record, medication data, vaccination data, results of cancer screenings, and child welfare reports that we share from within the first line care, with second line care and other healthcare professionals, and with the patients. If I can go into detail about the vaccination registration, well, it's a whole process. We have to select people to be invited for their vaccination. For instance, risk patients with a high risk medical profile should be invited with priority. So we have databases that have that information. We have a tool for inviting people to go to a vaccination center. The vaccination center has software for booking a vaccination slot, and they can register all vaccinations into our Vaxenet vaccination registry platform. So that's the, I think, the easy part. We also disclose that information to the personal viewers for the patients. We are now working on the digital green certificates. That's why I asked to be careful about the agenda. I have a meeting at 8 o'clock about the digital green certificate in Belgium and the implementation about that. So we can do other things. We share data for pharmacovigilance and traceability, and we support scientific and statistical studies, of course, like every other country is doing. To have a view on what is in place regarding the COVID-19 vaccination registration, I can show you these details. There are links at the end of my presentation that give you in English all the details about those databases. But here you can see in the middle the Vaxenet database, which publishes to VitaLink, that makes consultation possible. At the right side, we have the VONS database for pharmacovigilance. We have a scientific database that is called COVID-19 test result database. And we also have the vaccination codes database on which we do the selection of the population. So information is shared between those databases, of course, with the correct rules and with anonymization and pseudonymization if you are looking at scientific studies and reporting and things like that. So that's a very brief view on our architecture in Belgium about everything related to COVID-19 vaccines. We had to deliver the Vaxenet project within 5 weeks. Where did we focus on? So we had to onboard more than 5,000 extra vaccinators. I think it was not about the perfect system. We had to do a lot of changes to Vaxenet to make it ready for registration of the COVID-19 vaccinations in Belgium. But we invested a lot of time and money into the education of all the vaccinators to facilitate the onboarding into our program. I think that was more than 75% of our budget was training material and education support, help desk for the vaccinators. We also made the application Haye available, of course, and we also invested more into the web services for the electronic health records. Of course, there were some major electronic health records already integrated with our system, but the focus was much bigger. We had to integrate software from other regions and things like that. So we also focused on that part, besides, of course, BI reporting. And now we are delivering that data for the digital green certificate. We have a very big coverage of vaccination registration. It surely must be above 90%, 95% of all vaccines that are administered are also registered in Vaxenet. Next slide. Well, you can see here, like in every country, the evolution of all the doses, the first doses and the second doses that are given to our citizens. So that is data that comes from Vaxenet. I also want to talk a little bit about FHIR because it's really interesting for you guys, I think. Vaxenet doesn't use FHIR standards yet. we have a HL7 chapter in Belgium for the standardization and translation of the HL7 towards the Belgium dialect. That is in place, and we are working already on some standards. We also have an evolution of Vitalink, which is the Flemish health vault, and also the other regional vaults. We are working now on an implementation of HL7. In Flanders, it is, for instance, with the Happy server that we are doing the implementation. We are also doing a proof of concept about allergy intolerance. Probably one of the focuses from the real rollout of the system will be the multidisciplinary care sets for the first line care. The immunization resource is not yet in scope, but we now have a system in place. It works. Maybe we focus first on new things, then doing existing things again. And in this COVID crisis, it is not so good to turn around your vaccination registration system to a whole new platform at this moment. Some other information, some statistics, maybe, like to give you an idea, the amount of information that we share in Flanders. In Vitalink, we have already data for more than 8 million citizens. We have more than 3 million summarized electronic health records in Flanders. We have 1.5 million vaccination medication schemes in Vitalink. The vaccinations, there are already 6.5 million vaccinations, citizens with vaccination data in our system. And you see the other results for cancer screening and the child records from for children between 0 and 3 years old. We have a pretty good coverage of all GPs that are working with their electronic health records. The limit is around 10,000 GPs, I think, and we are on 8,400 users and 7,900 GPs. Also, pharmacies are on the system, dentists, nurses, hospitals, and things like that. And in the chart below, you see the evolution in updates per month on our system. So it is already in place since 2013 and is heavily used in Flanders at this moment, just like the other regional vaults. You can find other information via the links I shared to you. You have a very detailed analysis on the architecture of everything related to COVID-19 information systems. That's the first link. And the bottom link is also in English and gives you more detailed information about the federal e-health platform. I hope that was, I think it's within time limits. I don't know if there are any questions. I hope I didn't go too fast for you.
Thanks, Dominique. This is great. I think probably what we ought to do for questions for Dominique or any of the other speakers is go ahead and keep putting them in the chat. And if we can get back to any of them, at the end, we can, or we can do it asynchronously or whatever. But that's okay. Very, very interesting. Thanks.
Okay, I will share my final presentation via email to you, Rob.
Yeah. Excellent. Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks. So next, let's maybe go to Peter Williams and Suzie for SNOWMED.
Thanks, Rob. I'll share my screen if I may.
Yeah, let's see.
I think
Dominique will need to drop the screen share.
Yeah, I'm looking into it. Sorry for the delay, but I'm losing my screen at the moment.
We might. Robert might be able to switch it too. I don't know.
Yeah, I never use Zoom. We are using Teams. So where is the sharing button?
It's probably, since you're the presenter, I think if
I can only pause. Oh yeah, okay, I can stop it. I'm sorry.
It's like we're good.
Yep, Robert, I'd need you to stop as well. Thank you. Share screen too. There, can you see our screen okay?
Yep,
yes.
You can.
Yep.
Well, I'm Peter Williams. I'm a technical specialist for SNOMED International, and going to introduce Suzie Roy as well, my colleague, who's going to kick off the presentation.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Suzie Roy. I know many of you from other groups and initiatives, but just for those who don't, I'm the Customer Relations Manager for the Americas and Collaboration Specialist at SNOMED CT. And thanks for letting Peter and I join. We're excited to tell you guys a little bit about some of the SNOMED International terminology resources and support that we've provided for COVID vaccine, or just COVID-19 information and COVID vaccine information. Peter, next slide, please. So I'll give just a really brief kind of high level overview of some of our terminology resources. Yeah, just really high level. And then I'll let Peter take over and provide you with some of the details, some of the limitations of some of the resources, as well as how to access everything, as well as some of the benefits. So as many of you have mentioned, some of the current information models and some of the ongoing vaccine certificate models, a lot of the data elements are actually calling for standardized terminology, of course, underpinning a lot of those information models and services. And so SNOMED CT, which is the terminology that is maintained and owned by SNOMED International, we have really been trying to make sure to provide immediate response for any new content that any of you or others need for COVID-19 to ensure, ability to encode for COVID-19 pandemic issues, as well as the current vaccine certificate initiatives. So some of these content requests have been coming in through our member national release centers. And we've also been receiving some content requests directly to SNOMED International. We've also collaborated with a number of organizations and initiatives such as the COVID-19 Interoperability Alliance, led by Clinical Architecture. And so we have all of these content requests coming in, and we're trying to ensure that any of those concepts that are in scope for SNOMED CT are included in the international edition. Again, some of these that we are currently working on, I mean, this is hot off the presses as of last week and this week, those data elements that are needed for the EU Digital Green Certificate and the WHO Smart Vaccine Certificate. We've also done a number of things such as creating the COVID-19 data coding guide. All of these links are in the PowerPoint slide deck, which we will share with all of you. The other thing that I wanted to point to was all of the COVID-19 related content that we're discussing. Some of it has been published in our January 2021 release, but some of it is actually upcoming. So Peter, can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So what we've done is we've actually created the SNOMED CT COVID-19 related content page. And on this page, you'll see both the released, published content, as well as upcoming content that we plan on publishing in the next release, which will be July 31st. We do have to put into the caveat that because the the pre-release content is still being authored. So, be cautious when you're utilizing those identifiers, but with regards for, testing purposes and everything, we know that that content is needed. So we have gone ahead and provided identifiers where needed. All of this content that you see well, this is just a screenshot, but if you go to this page and you'll see all of the content, we can confirm that all of this content will be included in the upcoming SNOMED global patient set. Peter, do you mind going to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the SNOMED International Global Patient Set, we released it for the first time in 2019, and this is our set of SNOMED CT concepts that are freely available via the Creative Commons Attribution International License. So any of the SNOMED CT concepts that are related to COVID-19, as well as a number of our other SNOMED CT reference sets, such as what you see listed here. Just to point out that the International Patient Summary, which we work with our colleagues at HL7 and across the EU to ensure that those IPS needs are included. Those contents are all freely available via the GPS. A couple of really quick technical specifications that I want to make sure to mention. The GPS is actually only published once a year right now. So if you need this content that is on the pre-release page, you will need to access it there, or Peter will show you a way that we can access it via the terminology service. But once we publish all of that COVID-19 content will be included in the GPS, or you can grab it from the other mechanisms. The GPS is available in the freeset format, as well as the SNOMED CT RF2 specification. And this is not all of SNOMED, but it does include the concept identifiers, the fully specified name, the preferred term, and the current status. So if that concept is active or inactive. So as you continue with any of your efforts for, digital green certificate, the SBC and others, just, reach out to us, because we are trying to ensure that all of your terminology needs for your information models are, met by SNOMED CT. And from there, I'll let Peter take it away with some of the details.
Thank you, Susie. Just to say something about the International Medicinal Products Drug Model, is that it is an abstraction, and it starts with just the ingredients in the medicinal product, moves down to the form, and then the strength of the ingredient, which we would call the concrete drug. So we would expect your application to have access to a national extension where you're going to go down to the level of the actual concrete branded drugs, be it Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and so on. And those were the identifiers that Christian and Robert were showing you in previous slides. Currently, the GPS, as a subset of SNOMED content, has had the COVID-19 vaccine added to it. Again, that's something of an abstraction. And I didn't see these more specific children in it at the time. I will check on that tomorrow when I have a check-in. So what support are we hoping to offer the Connectathon here? Well, the terminology server is available for use, and I will post that URL into the chat for people to have a look at. And we've put the preview edition of the global patient set onto that. So that hasn't been officially published, but it will be available on the server. We can host any value sets that you'd like to send to me. I can get those uploaded and they'll be available pretty quickly. There should be multi-language support. And if there's any problems that come up, I can probably fix that within the hour or so. So I can be reached on Slack, or my email address is there. So what sort of things might you want to do with a terminology server like Snowstorm? Well, you can get a list of the value sets. We have a language, a constraint language called ECL, that would allow you to select parts of SNOMED. For example, here I've said, give me all procedures, and then apply a filter to that. So show me all procedures that have the word COVID in them. And you could get a list of those back as a value set. And that's what we call an implicit value set. So we don't need to store it on the server. You just have a URL containing your expression, and you can get a list of concepts back. We can do that filtering again, specifically to the concepts in the global patient sets. So there, in the third example, I've said, expand out the GPS and filter on the term COVID. And of course, you can validate that a SNOMED concept is part of the value set that you're looking at. So I mentioned that we've not yet published these concepts officially. And so here in my definition of the GPS value set, I've used a special version identifier. This is the URI that we're trialing for unpublished content, which has an X for experimental. So that says XSCT in it, as well as the identifier for the international edition of SNOMED. And this shows how easy it is to use ECL, but I just have this little hat here with the identifier for the GPS. So once I have my data in SNOMED, then I can just refer to the identifier for that. And that's a really quick way to make a value set. And there are some additional resources that may be of interest to you. So we've got Snowstorm there as a project in GitHub, that's open source. We've got some documentation on how to use the FHIR API as implemented by Snowstorm, and our document library and Slack channel there. And I think that is us just within the time limits given of 10 minutes. So Rob, I can hand the screen back to you. And I'll look for any questions in the chat as well.
Yep, that sounds good. Thanks very much, Peter and Susie. We've got 2 more presentations. Karima is not going to be giving hers today. In fact, she had to leave us, but we do have still Derek and Christof. I guess, Derek, you want to go ahead and take it at this point? We'll have to watch our time here, and I don't know if folks would be able to run over a few minutes or not, but anyway, well, let's see how we can do.
Am I a presenter? Am I able to go?
You should be. Yeah.
Looks like it. Yeah. All right. And please let me know whether or not you do or don't see see my screen.
Yep. It says to take 10 minutes or less.
Yeah. Well, let's go for less. So I'm going to storm through here like Deputy Dog, and I apologize ahead of time for that. I also apologize for the fact that I'm Canadian, and so we just apologize a lot. So that's it's just how it goes. The things I'm going to cover here, what's in the Smart Vaccination Certificate or SVC core data set. How does content get into a Smart Vaccination Certificate registry? We're now referring to it as a registry service in the upcoming release because it's not necessarily a database. It might be an abstraction that goes and gets content from other databases, a federation of databases. And then how does the SVC support proof of vaccination? So I'm going to just quickly refer to the fact that we have a release candidate that was out for comment. The comments have closed. We've been digesting 200 plus pages of comments that we got back and reflecting that in a release candidate 2. In the interim, there's also been the release of the digital Green Certificate in the EU, progress in the US, progress in India and elsewhere. So there's a lot that's informing the work that we've been doing. This is from release candidate 1 with just a couple of asterisks. First of all, thinking of the SVC as a header in details, in the header, unsurprisingly, there would be a unique identifier for the SVC. There would be the name, the date of birth, potentially, optionally, unique person identifiers, so a national ID or a health ID, those aren't required, and sex as an optional. We use the gender field, so please, I do know the difference between sex and gender. Just go with it. WHO refers to it as sex. We're putting it in the gender field, and we're using the HL7 code list for that content. It's optional, and that's important because it drove us into the arms of having to do some profiling of the IPS patient resource. In terms of the details, we have the vaccine, the brand, either the market authorization holder or the manufacturer. When was the dose administered? What was the dose number? There's an asterisk there because we did get feedback that we're probably missing one field, and that is the total doses in the course. So we're looking at that as a change in our core data set. The country of the administration, where the place, the signature of the health worker on a paper card, for example, or some health worker identifier, the disease or agent that's targeted, that's optional, and the due date of the next dose, that's also optional. I mentioned the paper first approach. WHO has issues it cannot wish away. And one of those issues is that across the 194 member states, there's quite a broad range of digital maturity. So the paper first idea is that if all you have is the yellow card that many do have that have had to travel in places where yellow fever is endemic, if all you have is a paper card, notionally, an SVC would have pre-printed on it a license plate that would navigate to the unique vaccination certificate identifier. And that means that if you went through the process of handwriting content onto that paper card, that handwritten content on a paper card could later be married to its digital twin. If an asynchronous process collected that information and later had it entered into a database, we could, after the fact, connect those two, the paper card and the data in the database, and in that way create, after the fact, a very smart vaccination certificate. This is notionally just what that process would look like. capturing content at the care site that may or may not make its way in real time through a digital point of care solution, or the digital point of care solution may not be connected, or there might not be one. It might be on paper that later gets entered into a database. If countries do have and have made investments in their digital health infrastructure, that can be leveraged. Notionally, there would be a public health authority that would operate an SVC registry service. As I said, that notionally would be outside of the care delivery network, on the other side of the firewall, because as part of validation workflows, somebody might have to hit that service who is not authenticatable as a member of the care delivery network. WHO is silent on what happens within the member state. So the operations of the care delivery network are not something that we're normative about. What we are going to be normative about is that there will be an identifier on a paper card. And once the content has been persisted and is available through an SVC registry service, there is the opportunity to do online verification that the content on the paper card can be verified against its digital twin. Now, of course, once you have that information in an electronic format, you can also persist it into a 2D barcode, for example. And this 2D barcode can be digitally signed by the public health authority. And that gives us now an opportunity for offline verification of that content, and also online verification that a QR code, for example, has not gone stale. We expect member states will fall in a spectrum. Some we already know are favoring a 100% online approach. So Brazil is already using that for their e-yellow cards. Nigeria is using a 100% online solution in the same way. In fact, the African Union seems to be favoring a 100% online solution. At the other end of the spectrum, the Europeans are favoring a 100% offline solution that will rely in its entirety on the 2D barcodes. So what's the format of this digital twin? And I'm going to storm through this quickly for two reasons. One, to try to leave time for the next presentation, and two, because I'm not by any stretch the smartest bear in the room when it comes to this particular part of it. We have got, as part of the release candidate 1, there was a FHIR IG for the Smart Vaccination Certificate that was developed, and it's at that address. And notionally, it includes just the things that you would find in a subset of the IPS that was particularly focused only on recording vaccination events. This is what the bundle, IG part of looks like, and I'm going to focus just particularly on what's different about the patient resource, what's different about the immunization resource, and then calling out that we are looking for a provenance resource, because as Rob mentioned very early in the first hour, digital signature is a core piece of this. So regarding the patient resource, because we're making gender optional, we have to do some profiling, because at present, gender is a mandatory field in the IPS patient resource. Regarding what is different about the immunization or the vaccination resource, which is profiled of the IPS immunization resource, WHO is calling out the ICD-11 code set as the normative one, and putting in a one-to-one map between ICD-11 and SNOWMED GPS for all of the reasons that everybody would expect. It's the dominant code system that's already out there. ICD-11's official release is not until next year, but we're expecting that the uptake of ICD-11 is going to be strong on a global basis following on. And we also expect that this work that WHO is undertaking will be foundational for smart vaccination certificates in use cases beyond just COVID-19. In terms of the provenance resource, you have to answer the question, what is it you're signing? And at RC1, the decision was that we're signing the bundle because the bundle also includes the resources that are referenced by the composition. So trying to pull this together quickly, and I said I would go quickly, sort of issues that we're still progressing. The gender or sex needs to be optional, and we are looking forward to an IPS update in that regard. the support for the ICD-11 coding and the one-to-one mapping. One of the things that we found that we thought we had done a better job of was to have that map in place for RC1, and that's been shored up a little bit for RC2. That was a lot of feedback in that regard. One of the things that is to note is that if the GPS just says COVID, we are looking for that extra level of detail. And I know Peter mentioned that he was going to check into that. Lastly, the finalization of the core data set. As I said, we were considering the addition of total doses, and that's being discussed internally within the WHO core team. And then lastly, the signing. This has to be, the SVC is a signed FHIR document. The QR code is being treated as a representation of that by definition, the SVC is the FHIR document. And so where does that signing happen? And presently we're looking at it being at the bundle, and I'm done. Happy to answer questions on the chat if there are some. Yes. And sorry for going through so quick.
Oh, yeah, lots of great material and little time, but thanks so much, Derek. So we are a couple of minutes over. I'll plan on staying on for a little bit longer for those of you who can. Anyone who can't, we certainly understand you need to move on, but let's go ahead and give the floor to Christof for his final presentation here. Yeah. See the screen?
Yeah, okay. So this is really a quick one, and there's it's almost a digital twin of Derek's talk, because the digital green certificate in Europe is not so different from the SVC, and they are sort of two flavors of the same thing. So I want to talk a little bit about the intention. There are some links here. I put them also in the chat, and there is also a reference implementation if you want to program. So you can look up here in kind of different programming languages what they're doing if you're interested. So the basic idea was already presented. It's the creation of trust. So somebody wants to verify something that somebody else has issued. So you need some kind of circle of trust. And as there are many issuers and many verifiers, the pragmatic solution is to use a trust anchor, which is the European gateway in that case, that is accessible by all the verifiers and has all the information that enables the trust to the issuers for any verifier. So this is basically the platform that is developed here for that purpose. This is the digital green certificate gateway, and it gets all the keys from all the signers from the countries, and it distributes those keys to the national backends of all the other countries. So any verifier can download those keys and check the validity of the signature. The user story is quite simple. There is a vaccination or a test or a negative or positive test, and somebody fills out a digital green certificate and requests a signature for that document and signs this document and gives it to the citizen. That's the logical flow. From the content, and that's probably what you're interested in, this is very, very sparse. So it's even much less than Derek just presented for the SVC, because the purpose is not medical treatment. The purpose is not continuity of care. It's in this current release 1, it's just and only access. So it's enabling or disabling access of persons to resources. So there are 3 different certificates. One is the proof of vaccination, one is the certificate of recovery, and another one is the negative test certificate. And you see it's really minimum what's in there. There's almost nothing medical, just the items that are required to make a qualified decision to grant access or deny access. So this is probably the slide that is most related to FHIR. Although it's not really relevant for the mainstream of the project. There are some health data coming in, and possibly in the format of FHIR, and there are actually some test servers that provide those data in the form of a FHIR resource, and then they are converted to a shorter notation of JSON, so a shortened version of JSON, and then again compressed in CBOR, and then signed digitally, compressed again. And so then it's small enough that all this crypto material and the data fit into this QR code, while the keys are transported over the gateway as I showed you before. So the validator app then can scan the QR code, check the validity, and that's it. So as it was said by Derek, this is a completely offline scenario, or it enables offline. Of course, it also enables online, but offline was the requirement. So you can present it on paper or on your smartphone, and there will be a verifier who scans it and basically just sees a green or red light as the result of that. So the verification is offline, as I said, so it verifies all the data, and then you have to check the passport of the person, because there is no full identity tracking in the certificate itself. It just indicates in a plausible way that it belongs to the holder, and it has to be verified by showing a personal identification document in addition to the DGC. And then the decision is made. So that's basically it. And so there is a relatively small set of technology libraries that have to be implemented on the verifiers tool. And the result is just yes or no. And in the next step, people are considering how to formalize the rule set that can make those decisions based on the content of the barcode, so that they can also be updated on a daily basis or so. So the verification apps would know the most recent rules to grant access or deny it. So that's basically what I wanted to present here, to give you some insight on what's happening in Europe. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Christof. So this is great. So we've had a lot of great presentations here, and I think we were, as I said, we're over time. So let's go ahead and wrap up for today. We need to continue to go ahead and use the Zulip chat for further questions, because we won't have this chat available after this, and we'll be taking this information and making use of it as we get into the Connectathon starting next week. So thanks so much, everyone. Yes, Paul is asking about a Zoom recording. It has been recorded, and we will make that available. Check with Robert. We'll check with Robert on that, and we'll make it available in Zulip and in the conference page and all that. So we'll let everyone go, and thanks for staying over a little bit for those of you who could, and we'll look forward to some great times next week.
Thank you. Hope to see you.